Have you ever felt someone watching you when you thought you were alone? A chill on your neck, a shadow crossing your path, a sense that you can't shake off? Tonight we share 3 chilling tales of stalkers lurking in plain sight. Listen closely, because these stories might remind you that sometimes the scariest secrets hide right next door. Stay with us, if you dare. Mrs. Henderson lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's name. She liked to grow flowers in her front yard and wave to anyone passing by. She believed her street was peaceful. She never locked her doors during the day because she felt so safe. One day, she noticed a man moving into the empty house across the street. His name was Mr. Easton, and he barely talked to anyone. He kept his blinds shut, even during warm, sunny afternoons. At first, Mrs. Henderson felt sorry for him. She thought he might be lonely. It started with small things. Late at night, Mrs. Henderson heard creaking footsteps on the porch. When she peeked outside, the street was empty. She told herself it was just the wind or maybe a stray cat looking for food. But deep inside, she felt uneasy. She tried to ignore the feeling. Then she began finding footprints around her garden, circling her house. She asked her friends if they had similar problems, but they shook their heads. Every evening, Mrs. Henderson would see Mr. Easton standing by his window. His face was hidden behind the curtain, but she sensed he was looking right at her. It made her skin tingle. She reminded herself that she shouldn't judge people. Perhaps he had trouble making friends. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her every time she watered her plants or brought in the mail. One morning, she found a single yellow flower on her doorstep. It was tied with a piece of string. She thought it was a sweet gesture until she noticed tiny footprints leading away from the step and toward Mr. Easton's house. The next day, there was a small note tucked under her door. It said, "I see you every day." Her heart pounded. She tried to tell herself it could be from anyone, but the uneasy feeling grew. She decided to confront Mr. Easton. She knocked on his door with trembling hands. He opened it just a crack and stared at her. His eyes seemed cold. She asked if he had left the flower. He said nothing. She asked about the note. He just gave a thin smile. Mrs. Henderson felt a chill run down her back. Then, without a word, he closed the door. That night, she couldn't sleep. She heard soft tapping on her windows. She rushed to the window to look, but saw no one. She checked the locks on her doors and decided to keep the lights on. Hours later, she realized she was too afraid to even step outside. A strange fear took hold, making her wonder if Mr. Easton was watching from the darkness. In the following weeks, the notes became stranger. "I like watching you. I know your schedule. Don't ignore me." She refused to leave her home after sunset. She tried to call the police, but they didn't have enough evidence to do anything. They suggested maybe it was some kids playing pranks. They advised her to stay safe and keep an eye on anything suspicious. One evening, she caught a silhouette outside her window. She saw someone press their face against the glass. Her stomach twisted with fear. She turned on every light, hoping the brightness would scare them away. Then she saw the figure hurry across her lawn, heading toward Mr. Easton's house. Her hands shook as she tried to dial for help, but her phone line was dead. Terrified, she decided to drive to a friend's house and call the police from there. As she stepped outside, she noticed Mr. Easton standing on his porch, staring right at her. She locked her car doors and sped away, her heart racing. By the time the police arrived, Mr. Easton's lights were off, his curtains shut. The officers found footprints in Mrs. Henderson's flower beds and a small crack in her window frame. They questioned Mr. Easton. He claimed he knew nothing. He even said that he had been asleep. Without proof, the police couldn't do much. They advised Mrs. Henderson to install a security camera. She took their advice, but she still felt scared every night. She waited for her camera to catch him in the act so she could finally have peace. But soon after the camera went up, Mr. Easton disappeared. It was like he vanished into thin air. His house was empty with no sign of him returning. Mrs. Henderson looked at her camera footage and saw only glimpses of a shadow near the fence. She never got the clear evidence she wanted. In the months that followed, she slowly started going out again. She planted new flowers, replaced her broken window, and tried to feel safe. Yet, even in the bright sunshine, she sometimes sensed a pair of eyes. She would turn around, expecting to see Mr. Easton staring at her from the shadows. But the street was empty. In her own mind, she wondered if she was ever truly alone again. A young boy named Caleb lived in a large city with tall buildings and busy streets. He took the bus to and from school each day. He was quiet, kind, and loved to read superhero comics. One afternoon, while waiting at the bus stop, he noticed a man sitting on the bench across from him. The man wore a gray coat with a high collar. At first, Caleb thought nothing of it. After all, the city was full of strangers. But over the next few days, the man kept appearing at the bus stop at the same time as Caleb. He wouldn't get on any bus. He would just sit, watching with cold eyes. Caleb felt uneasy, but he tried to ignore it. Then, he noticed the man stood up only when Caleb stood up. If Caleb moved to the far end of the bench, the man would slide closer. Caleb tried to tell himself he was imagining things, but the uneasy feeling in his stomach grew each day. Caleb told his mom what he had seen. She said it might be a coincidence, but to be safe, she started picking him up after school. For a while, Caleb didn't see the man. He relaxed, but one day, his mom was busy. Caleb had to ride the bus by himself again. There, sitting on the bench, was the same man in the gray coat. He smiled when he saw Caleb. It wasn't a friendly smile. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. On the bus ride, Caleb sat near the driver, hoping to feel safer. As they reached his stop, he saw through the window that the man was now standing near a newspaper stand. Caleb stayed on the bus until the next stop, thinking he might trick the man. When he finally got off, he felt proud of himself. He believed he had lost the stranger. But as he walked home, he spotted a figure in a gray coat following him from across the street. Caleb rushed inside his apartment building, shaking with fear. He told his mom he was sure the man followed him. She looked worried and decided to call the police. The police told them to stay alert and to report if anything serious happened. Caleb's mom started driving him to school each morning. She also picked him up whenever she could. But the city was busy. Sometimes she couldn't avoid letting him take the bus. On those days, Caleb felt dread in his stomach. One afternoon, Caleb stepped off the bus and the man appeared again. He was waiting by the same newspaper stand. Caleb was alone. The man quietly crossed the street and began walking a few steps behind him. Caleb walked faster, clutching his backpack. He felt tears in his eyes. He didn't want to cry, but the fear was too strong. He thought about running into a store, but they were all closed. It was getting late. He felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He turned a corner and ducked behind a tall trash bin. He held his breath. The footsteps drew closer. When they paused, he dared to peek around the corner. The man was scanning the sidewalk, his eyes searching for Caleb. Caleb's heart felt like it would burst. Then, for some reason, the man walked away. Caleb waited a long time before he went home, making sure the man was truly gone. Caleb's mom was alarmed when she saw how frightened he was. She talked to the building manager, who checked the security cameras around the entrance. They found a blurry image of a man in a gray coat standing in the lobby on 2 separate evenings. He didn't knock on any doors or speak with anyone. He just waited, then left. That was enough for the police to take action. They increased their patrol in the area, but the man still showed up at the bus stop sometimes. Caleb spotted him from a distance and stayed on the bus. One day, the man didn't even try to hide. He waved at Caleb. Caleb felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He didn't know what the man wanted. He felt helpless. His mom tried driving him to school more often, but life got complicated. One Sunday morning, Caleb was leaving a friend's house. He took a shortcut through a quiet alley. He froze when he saw the gray coat at the other end of the alley. The man started walking toward him. This time, there was no one else around. Caleb felt panic. He remembered what his mother had always told him: if you feel unsafe, run and shout for help. So he ran. He yelled as loud as he could. He burst onto the main street. A few people turned to look at him. The man in the gray coat stopped in his tracks. He turned and walked the other way, disappearing into the busy crowd. Caleb, trembling, called his mom. By the time the police arrived, there was no sign of the man. Yet that day, Caleb realized he wasn't helpless. He had a voice, and he had a right to be safe. He reported everything again, and the police promised to watch more closely. In the weeks that followed, Caleb never saw the man again. He waited nervously each day, looking around corners and scanning faces in the crowd. Sometimes he thought he saw the gray coat or a similar face. His heart would pound, but when he looked carefully, the person was a stranger. Over time, he began to feel normal again. Yet he never forgot the fear of being watched. He hoped that by staying aware and speaking up, he would never have to face that horror again. Alice was a cheerful teenager who loved to chat with her friends. She spent hours texting, sharing funny pictures, and talking about her day. She was always friendly, even to people she didn't know well. One evening, she received a message from an unknown number that said, "Hello, how are you?" Alice thought it might be a classmate who got a new phone. She replied politely, but the person gave short answers and wouldn't say their name. Over the next few days, she got more messages from the unknown number. They asked questions about her school, her favorite places to hang out, and which days she stayed late for after-school activities. Alice felt a bit uneasy, but thought maybe it was a shy student trying to make friends. She kept replying, though she never got a clear answer about who they were. She decided to block the number when the messages started to become strange. "I like seeing you in the halls," one said. Another read, "You look nice in your blue sweater." Alice realized she had worn a blue sweater that day. Her heart skipped a beat. How did this person see her at school? She told her best friend Maria, who suggested telling a teacher or parent. Alice wasn't sure. She didn't want to worry her mother, and she thought maybe she was just overreacting. But the messages wouldn't stop. Even after she blocked the number, another unknown number started texting her. The tone got darker. "Don't ignore me, Alice," it said. "I know where you sit at lunch." She felt a chill each time her phone buzzed. She stopped answering altogether, hoping it would end. Then, she began to find little notes in her school locker. They said things like, "Why won't you write back? And I saw you walking home yesterday." She tried to act normal around her friends, but she was scared. She told Maria everything. They checked the school lockers nearby to see if someone was watching. They found no clues. One day, Alice got a note in her backpack that said, "Meet me by the old oak tree after school." The oak tree stood in a quiet area behind the school. Alice felt torn. She wanted to ignore it, but she also wanted answers. She told Maria to come with her if she decided to go. After classes ended, Alice and Maria walked to the old oak tree together. No one was there, but they found a single white envelope with Alice's name on it. Inside the envelope was a small photo of Alice in the library, taken from behind a bookshelf. She realized someone had been watching her closely, snapping pictures when she wasn't looking. She dropped the photo in shock. At that moment, Maria convinced her it was time to tell someone in charge. They rushed to a teacher, who called the principal. The principal listened carefully and said they would investigate, but the day ended with no clear answers about who was behind all this. Alice's mother noticed her daughter was afraid. She checked Alice's phone and saw the unsettling messages. She called the police right away. Officers suggested changing Alice's phone number, but that didn't stop the notes from appearing at school. Each new message seemed more desperate. The stalker wrote about feeling ignored and wanting to be close to her. A few weeks later, Alice stayed after school for a group project. When she finally stepped outside, the halls were quiet. She felt her phone vibrate. It was another unknown number. "I'm outside. Talk to me." She panicked and called her mother, but her mother was stuck in traffic. She tried to reach Maria, but her friend had already gone home. Alice decided to walk to the main road, where it was well lit. She kept checking behind her. She thought she saw a figure standing near the fence. Each time she looked back, the figure seemed to move out of sight. Her phone buzzed again. "Why are you running from me?" Her heart pounded like a drum. She dialed 911 and told them she was being followed. A police car arrived not long after. When the officers searched the area, they found footprints near the fence, but no sign of the stalker. They walked Alice home, reminding her to stay alert. Over the next few days, the police interviewed teachers and students. Some people remembered seeing a student hanging around Alice's locker, but no one knew his name. A few students thought it could be an older teen who'd dropped out. Rumors spread, but no one could confirm the stalker's identity. With the police watching, the messages slowed. Then they stopped. Alice felt like she could breathe again. She wanted to return to her normal life, laughing with friends and focusing on her studies. But a small part of her stayed fearful whenever her phone rang or buzzed. Each time she got a text, she hesitated before opening it. In time, Alice found new ways to protect herself. She kept her phone number private, she changed her daily routine, and she made sure never to walk alone after school. She learned to trust her instincts and speak up when she felt uneasy. Though she never found out who sent those messages or watched her from behind that bookshelf, she stayed determined. She promised herself she would never again allow a stranger to scare her into silence. She understood that courage could chase away the darkest shadows, and knowledge could keep her safe in a world where anyone could be hiding behind a phone screen. Thank you for joining us on these 3 unsettling journeys. Each story serves as a reminder that danger can be closer than we think, but staying alert and trusting our instincts can help.